Here is a fact that should not be possible. Jesus of Nazareth chose 12 men, ordinary men, fishermen, a tax collector, a political radical. Within one generation, according to the records and memory of the early church, 11 of them were dead, executed one by one across 3 continents. Only one of the 12 grew old. And here is the part that keeps historians up at night. Every single one of them could have stopped it with a sentence. One sentence. I made it up. Nobody said it. Spread out a map of the ancient world. Put your finger on Jerusalem. Now watch what happens after the year 33. 12 roads open up from that one city, north into Asia Minor, west to Greece and Rome, south into Africa, east through Persia, all the way to the coast of India. Each road is a man, and almost every road ends the same way. Today we follow all 12 roads to the end. One thing before we start, because this channel does not do legends dressed up as facts, Scripture itself records only 2 of these deaths. The other 10 come down to us through the memory of the early church, some traditions strong and early, some late and tangled. Where the sources disagree, I will tell you. What no source disagrees on is how the story ends. They went out and they did not come back. The first road is the shortest one. It never leaves Jerusalem. James, the son of Zebedee. He and his brother John were fishermen with a family business and a father who watched them walk away from the boat mid-shift. Jesus gave the 2 brothers a nickname, Boanerges, sons of thunder. And they earned it. When a village refused to welcome Jesus, these 2 asked, apparently with straight faces, whether they should call fire down from the sky and burn it to the ground. Jesus turned around and rebuked them. That was James, a man with a furnace in his chest and no thermostat. Around the year 44, King Herod Agrippa wanted to score points with the crowd, so he arrested believers. The book of Acts records what happened next. In one brutally short line, he had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. That's it, one sentence. The first of the 12 to die, and the only apostle whose martyrdom is written directly into the pages of the New Testament. But the early church remembered one more detail, passed down through Clement of Alexandria. The man who dragged James to court was so shaken by watching him face death that he confessed Christ on the spot and was beheaded beside him. Take that tradition for what it is, a memory, not a court transcript. But notice what the memory says. The son of thunder, the man who once wanted to incinerate a village, went to the sword so calmly that his own prosecutor switched sides. The fire never went out, it just changed owners. The second road is the darkest, and it also never leaves the city. Judas Iscariot. He walked every mile the others walked, saw the blind see, handled the money, literally, he kept the group's purse. And then he went to the chief priests and asked a question that still makes the skin crawl. What will you give me? They counted out 30 pieces of silver. In the law of Moses, that is the compensation price for a dead slave. The going rate for the Son of God turned out to be the price of a body. What happens next is the detail people skip. Judas regretted it. Matthew says that when he saw Jesus condemned, he tried to give the money back. I have sinned, he told them. I betrayed innocent blood. And the priest shrugged. What is that to us? He threw the silver into the temple, walked out, and hanged himself. Stop and compare 2 men for a moment. That same night, Peter also betrayed Jesus, denied him 3 times with curses. Both men failed catastrophically. Both wept. The difference is not the size of the sin. The difference is where each man carried it. One carried it back to Jesus and was rebuilt. The other carried it alone into the dark and was crushed. Remorse without return is just despair with a religious vocabulary. Which brings us to the third road, the one that runs 2,000 kilometers west, all the way to the capital of the world. Peter, the fisherman who talked first and thought second, the man who swore he would die before denying Jesus and folded the same night in front of a servant girl warming her hands by a charcoal fire. Here is the detail I cannot get over. After the resurrection, Jesus met Peter on a beach at dawn, and John's gospel goes out of its way to tell us there was a charcoal fire burning. Same smell, same flickering light on his face. Jesus rebuilt the scene of Peter's worst failure, and inside it asked him 3 times, "Do you love me?" One question for each denial. Then he handed the coward the keys, "Feed my sheep." He didn't skip the wound. He healed it from the inside. Peter spent the next 3 decades proving that healing was real. Jerusalem, Antioch, and finally Rome. in the exact years Nero was looking for someone to blame for the Great Fire of 64. Christians were crucified, burned as street lamps, fed to animals. Somewhere in that horror, tradition says, Peter was condemned to a cross. And the memory the church kept, recorded by Origen, is that he asked to be crucified upside down, saying he was not worthy to die in the same posture as his Lord. Historians debate the upside-down detail. Fine, but sit with the shape of the story, because even the skeptics grant that Peter died in Rome under Nero. The man who once caved to a servant girl stared down the most powerful psychopath on earth, and this time he did not deny anything. Road 4 also runs west, into Greece, and it belongs to the most underrated man in the New Testament, Andrew, Peter's brother. Every time you meet him in the Gospels, he is doing the same quiet thing, bringing someone to Jesus. He brings his own brother, arguably the most consequential introduction in history. He brings the boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish. He brings a group of curious Greeks. Andrew never preaches a recorded sermon, he just keeps opening the door. Tradition sends him north and west after Pentecost, the Black Sea region, then Greece. And in the city of Patmos, the story goes, he was sentenced to crucifixion on an X-shaped cross. The tradition adds that he was tied to it rather than nailed, so that death would come slowly, and that for 2 days he preached to the crowd from the cross itself. The man who spent his whole life bringing people to Jesus spent his last 2 days doing exactly that, from the one pulpit nobody chooses. That X-shaped cross is on the flag of Scotland to this day. The quiet brother ended up on a national flag. Road 5 is the longest road on the map, and it might be the best documented surprise in this whole story. Thomas. Say his name and everyone finishes the phrase, doubting Thomas. 1 bad week and 2,000 years of branding. But look at what he actually said earlier, when Jesus insisted on walking into Judea, where the mobs were waiting with stones. It was Thomas who turned to the others and said, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." That is not a doubter. That is a soldier who assumes the mission is fatal and signs up anyway. Then the crucifixion broke him, and when the others claimed the tomb was empty, Thomas set his terms. "Unless I put my finger in the nail marks, I will not believe." A week later, Jesus walked through a locked door and offered him exactly that. Scripture never says Thomas actually touched the wounds. Seeing was enough, and the alleged doubter said the single most direct confession in the entire New Testament, "My Lord and my God." Now watch where that confession carried him. East, past the edge of the Roman Empire entirely, through Persia and down to the southwest coast of India, arriving, by the local tradition, in Kerala in the year 52. And here is what makes Thomas different from every other case on this list. The evidence is still walking around. To this day, there are millions of Indian believers who call themselves St. Thomas Christians and trace their communities to his preaching, a living tradition nearly 2,000 years old. Near Chennai, a hill still bears his name, where the tradition says he was run through with spears around the year 72. The man who demanded to touch the wounds carried them farther than anyone. Road 6 runs south, into Africa. Matthew. Before Jesus, his name was on the most hated door in Capernaum, the tax booth, a Jew collecting money for Rome, which made him, in his neighbor's eyes, a traitor with a ledger. Rabbis wouldn't teach him. Decent families wouldn't seat him. And Jesus walked up to that booth, looked at the most disqualified man in town, and said 2 words, "Follow me." Matthew got up and never went back. Then he threw a dinner party and invited the only friends a tax collector has, other tax collectors and assorted sinners, and Jesus sat down in the middle of them, to the horror of every respectable observer. The healthy don't need a doctor. The traitor with a ledger used that ledger skill to give us the Gospel of Matthew, the very first book of the New Testament. As for his death, the traditions genuinely scatter. The strongest thread sends him to Ethiopia and a death by the sword. Others say Persia. A few say he died in peace. I won't pretend certainty, the sources don't have. But every version agrees on the part that matters. The man bought back from the tax booth spent the rest of his life giving the treasure away. Road 7 runs into modern-day Turkey, and it comes with an archaeological twist. Philip, the practical one. When Jesus asked him how to feed 5,000 people, Philip did the math out loud. 200 denarii wouldn't buy them each a bite. Accurate and completely beside the point. The answer was standing in front of him. At the Last Supper, he made one honest request. Lord, just show us the Father, and that will be enough for us. And Jesus gave him an answer that still stops theologians cold. Have I been with you this long, Philip, and you still don't know me? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. Tradition plants Philip's last years in Hierapolis, a Roman spa town in Asia Minor, and says he was martyred there, crucified in most tellings. For centuries, that was just a story. Then, in 2011, archaeologists excavating Hierapolis announced they had uncovered a first-century tomb at the center of a massive ancient church complex. A shrine the early believers built, they concluded, around the grave of Philip the Apostle. Sometimes the ground remembers what the libraries lost. Road 8 climbs into the mountains of Armenia, and it belongs to the man with the sharpest tongue in the group, Bartholomew, almost certainly the same man John's Gospel calls Nathanael. His audition for the 12 was an insult. Told that the Messiah had been found and that he came from Nazareth, Nathanael fired back, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Jesus overheard and loved it. Behold an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. Here was a man incapable of faking, which is exactly why his U-turn seconds later. Rabbi, you are the Son of God, carries so much weight. Skeptics make the best witnesses. Tradition carries him east to Armenia, and the tradition of his death there is the one nobody forgets, flayed alive, then beheaded. It is a late tradition, and the accounts vary. Some versions say crucifixion instead. But the flaying stuck in the church's imagination so hard that in the Sistine Chapel, in Michelangelo's Last Judgment, Bartholomew stands holding his own empty skin. Armenia, meanwhile, became the first nation on earth to officially adopt Christianity. The honest skeptic's road ended in a country's conversion. Roads 9 and 10 run east together into Persia, and they belong to the strangest pairing on the list, Simon the Zealot and Judas Thaddaeus. The other Judas, the one history keeps having to footnote so nobody confuses him with the traitor. At the Last Supper, he asked exactly one recorded question, Lord, why show yourself to us and not to the world? And received one of the deepest answers in John's Gospel. Anyone who loves me will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come and make our home with him. But think about what Simon's nickname means. The Zealots were the resistance, men who wanted Rome out by the blade if necessary. And who else was in the 12? Matthew, a man who had collected taxes for Rome. Jesus put the insurgent and the collaborator on the same team and made them share bread for 3 years. Everywhere else on earth, those two men meet in an alley and one doesn't walk out. In this group, they became brothers. That fact alone is a miracle nobody puts on the lists. Western tradition sends Simon and Thaddaeus into Persia together and has them martyred together, which is why the church still celebrates them on the same feast day. In the old iconography, Thaddaeus carries a spear and Simon carries a saw, grim badges of the deaths tradition assigned them. The details are uncertain. The direction is not east, away from safety, together. Road 11 barely has a map at all. James, the son of Alphaeus, the other James. If you feel like you know nothing about him, you're in good company. The Gospels list his name and tell us almost nothing else. No recorded sentence. No famous moment. Traditions about his end scatter from Egypt to Persia and don't agree on the method. And I want to argue that this silence is not a gap in the story. It is part of the story. Out of 12 foundation stones of the church, at least one is completely anonymous, which means the qualification for being counted was never fame. There are people in every generation who hold the whole thing up and never get a chapter. Heaven keeps records the historians don't. And then there is the 12th road, the one that does not end in blood. John, the other son of thunder, the one who wanted to burn that village down. He was there at every hinge of the story, the Last Supper, leaning against Jesus, the courtyard, the only one of the 12 the Gospels place at the foot of the cross itself, where a dying Jesus looked down and handed him a final assignment, behold your mother. The rest ran. The kid stayed. Tradition, recorded by Tertullian, says Rome tried to kill him too, thrown into boiling oil, the story goes, and came out alive. Whatever stands behind that memory, what's certain is that Rome settled for exile. They shipped him to a prison island called Patmos, and it backfired spectacularly. Alone on that rock, John received the visions that became the book of Revelation. The empire tried to silence him and accidentally commissioned the finale of the Bible. He was released, settled in Ephesus, and died around the year 100, an old man, the last living link to Jesus of Nazareth. And the early church kept one story about his final years that I think about constantly. Too frail to preach, he would be carried into the assembly and say the same sentence over and over, "Little children, love one another." When they finally asked him why he never said anything else, he answered, "Because it is the Lord's command. And if you do only this, it is enough." The man who once asked for fire from heaven spent his last breath repeating the word love. That is not a personality change. That is what 3 years with Jesus, followed by a lifetime of loss, does to a furnace. It doesn't go out. It gets aimed. So step back and look at the whole map. 12 roads out of one city: Jerusalem, Rome, Patras, Kerala, Ethiopia, Hierapolis, Armenia, Persia, Patmos. 11 violent ends and one old man on an island. And now let me show you why this map is an argument. People die for false beliefs all the time. That proves sincerity, not truth. But the 12 were not dying for something they'd been told. They were dying for something they claimed to have seen with their own eyes. A dead man, alive, eating fish, inviting fingers into his scars. If they invented it, they knew they invented it. And every one of them had years, decades, of arrests, beatings, and blades in which recanting would have saved them. Liars make poor martyrs. 11 graves say none of them blinked. The 12th survivor spent 60 years telling the same story to anyone who would listen. One last image. The final time, all 12 names appear together. They are hiding in a locked room in Jerusalem, terrified of a knock on the door. That is the before photo. The after photo is the map. The same frightened men scattered across the known world, none of them hiding, none of them silent, none of them silent, none of them safe. Something happened between those two photographs. Every explanation on offer has to be big enough to fill that gap. If one of these 12 roads stopped you, the doubter who went farthest, the traitor who came back, the quiet brother, the anonymous one, put his name in the comments. I read them, and I want to know which road hits closest to yours. And if you want the whole story these men died telling, from the Garden of Genesis to the city at the end of Revelation, this channel is walking through the entire Bible, one book at a time. Subscribe and walk with us, because the tomb they guarded is still empty, and the question it asked those 12 men has never stopped being asked. Now that you know, what will you do about it?